Medical innovation is crucial for advancing the science of medicine, helping more patients, stopping suffering, and reversing diseases. But oftentimes, that innovation is stifled by the high costs of clinical trials and the complex maze of government regulations and reporting requirements that add even more costs to getting a drug or even a natural product to market. For many companies, this means those life-saving advances never make it to patients. Now there's a way to fast track human clinical trials because where there is a problem, there sometimes is an entrepreneur who's got the intelligence, the drive, the grit to make the changes happen. And I'm excited today to be interviewing one of those, Julio Martinez-Clark. He's the CEO of Bioaccess, and his company, and through their innovations in clinical trials, are slashing the costs of drug development. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me on your show, John. It's a pleasure.
So tell us a little bit. So for the uninitiated, most people out there, consumers, everybody has frustrations about the medical system and how inefficient it is. I think just as patients, they understand that. They may have had frustrations with themselves or loved ones, not maybe with being out of access or a drug, or if they have certain conditions where there isn't an effective drug, of not getting the therapy they needed. Talk to me and to us about what is the problem and what are the potential solutions that you're working on?
Well, before speaking about the problem, John, I think it's important for the audience to understand, how do medical innovations start? What's the origin? And then with that context, we're going to be able to understand the problems that these innovations or the companies developing these innovations face. Usually, medical innovations happen at a research lab in a university. The United States is the most innovative country in the world, probably, is where most of the medical innovations happened. I mean, hubs like in Boston, in Minneapolis, in San Francisco, San Diego, and other places. The universities, they have the ecosystems to support medical innovation, including universities, including investors, including hospitals, etc. So usually the NIH, the government, the US government, grants money to research labs inside universities. And these labs develop therapeutics, drugs or devices, and they patent these innovations. It's the intellectual property. And they have an office called the Office of Technology Transfer. And that office is in charge of finding entrepreneurs, people who are willing to look at the intellectual property, the patent, and see the potential to impact lives, to make money, etc. And they license the patent to these entrepreneurs. It's usually a small startup. It's usually a Delaware corporation. It's a small company where they put together a team of experts in developing the type of innovation they are licensing from the university. And they raise the necessary funds, a few $1 million that are necessary to do all the development, all the phases of development, including lab or bench testing, animal testing, cadaver testing, human testing, and human testing has different phases of testing as well. So it's a long process of developing these innovations. So with that said, the subject of the conversation is usually a medical device or biotechnology or biopharma startup company that is a spin-off of that university that developed the technology. And it's usually a very small 3 to 5 people company with probably $5 million in the bank. And they are ready to do the testing necessary to validate the safety and efficacy of that innovation. Of course, they do a lot of testing in animals. And once they conclude the preclinical animal testing, as it is called, they move to the clinical phase. The clinical phase is the actual human testing, and that's the topic of the conversation today. So the problem that these startup companies face is that in the United States, the system is set up in such a way that it makes the approval process for these first in human clinical trials, because again, it's the first time the innovation is tested in a live clinical setting in live patients. So it's called a first in human or phase one clinical trial. So in the United States, the way the hospital systems work, the way the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, or the ethical committees necessary to approve these clinical trials work, and also prevent these companies from moving really fast. And speed is the name of the game. Why speed? Because remember, these companies raise funds from investors to develop the technology. So investors want return on their investment, of course, and they have certain timelines to obtain those returns. They have a business plan with certain milestones to hit before they have an exit, which is really the liquidity event that they're seeking. In other words, for the audience that is not familiar with the terminology, a liquidity event is the point in time when the startup gets the money that they invested back. Usually that liquidity event in the innovation world, in the medical innovation world, is an acquisition by a larger medical device or pharmaceutical company. In other words, startups are usually created to develop a therapy with a single focus or the single objective of being sold to Pfizer, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Merck, the big players in the medical world, medical devices or pharmaceutical. So with that understanding, we now see that time is really of the essence for these companies because they have business plans, as I said, they have timelines, and they have some milestones to hit. And on those milestones, they create more and more value so that they can sell the company for bigger and bigger amounts. Usually, these companies are sold anywhere between $300 and $600 million, sometimes even more, sometimes even less, but it's a large number. So everybody will be happy with the outcome. The investors, the employees, because they own shares in the company. So everybody's vested in the development of these therapies, and everybody's going the same direction. So the problem is that these companies in the United States face many challenges. The first one is the one that I just described. Dealing with large hospital systems is really bureaucratic, time-consuming. Getting IRB approvals is also bureaucratic and time-consuming. 20 meetings to agree to one meeting, things like that. And then navigating the FDA waters it's just difficult, especially now with the political changes and the layoffs and the uncertainty in the regulatory pathway for these companies at the FDA. Not to mention the difficulty in recruiting patients because people are busy. They have many options. They are not always willing to participate in these trials because they don't really need to, because they have jobs, they have families, they have access to the healthcare system. There are options. So all this is to say that these companies, John, are forced to look for alternatives, look for options overseas, usually, to fast track the approval process of these trials.
So when you're looking at those different stages of drug development, I remember seeing these statistics many years ago. Hopefully you'll know what I'm talking about and will know them because I don't remember the exact data, but only a very small percentage of potential drugs that have been identified in a laboratory, a very small percentage then are shown to be safe in animal studies and can move to a phase one. And then only a certain percentage of those actually show the safety profile in humans and advance to phase two. And only a small percentage of those actually show that they're effective. so that overall the risk for early stage investors on their money and trying to help develop new products, medical devices. I don't know what the data is for medical devices. I'm just talking about drugs.
Mhm.
That it's a very high risk proposition for them. So I can only imagine, if you can compress that timeline and they can get answers faster, it's a win for everybody. Do you know those numbers off the top of your head by any chance?
No, I don't know those numbers, unfortunately, but
But they're small.
I echo, yes, I echo what you're saying. There are really small chances that these companies have to make it. For example, just to quote a number that I hear a lot is investors usually evaluate over a hundred startups before they invest in one company.
Wow.
So the funnel gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So out of those one companies that are being invested, right, that are being funded, then you have all these companies putting money into development, and then also a small percentage of those one companies are going to make it. So the chances are really, really, really small.
All right. So we tell us about your background because you obviously have an expertise in a niche that the average person walking around doesn't. You're
Yeah.
deeply involved in this industry in this sector. You're in Colombia. Your company is in Colombia. Is that correct?
No, our company, I'm in Colombia today because I'm traveling for business.
Oh, got it.
I also happens that my family lives here. I was born and raised in Colombia, but I moved to the US over 40 years ago. I am based in Miami. The company is based in Miami, but we have a global presence all over Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Australia.
Got it. Got it. And so, how did you get involved working in this? Because I don't know. Has your background always been in drug development?
No, really, the genesis, John, is my brother Pedro. He completed medical school in Colombia. He moved to the US. He did 2 years or so of research at a Harvard lab in Boston. Then he went to Cleveland, Ohio to do his residency in internal medicine at the Case Western Metro Health Medical Center, Case Western University. And he moved back to Boston, to Harvard, to do Harvard Medical School, to do cardiology and then interventional cardiology at the Beth Israel Medical Center. And after that, he moved to Miami. And that's why our company is based in Miami. He became a professor at the University of Miami in the cardiovascular department, and he met his mentor, Dr. William O'Neill, Bill O'Neill. He is one of the top interventional cardiologists in the world. And him and Pedro and O'Neill worked together in many research papers, published in top journals, patents, and also preclinical animal and clinical human studies, testing. And they were advising many US startups developing advanced cardiovascular technologies, and they saw the struggle that these companies face when they are ready to embark on the first in human journey. Where to do the first in human trial? What hospital around the world can accept our trial, is willing to lead the study? What investigators can recruit patients fast for us? So things like that, they saw were really, really difficult to answer for these companies. So they decided to create a separate company outside of the international department of the University of Miami, which wasn't really set up for this type of work because it's just an international patient department that deals with international patients who come to Miami for advanced medical care. But they decided to create a company, and that's Bioaccess now. And fast track 20 years, we are the only medical device and biopharma contract research organization specializing in helping U.S. startups with their first in human testing.
And this testing and the approval is for eventually approval overseas, not through the US FDA, or is it? Are you tell me how that is structured? Because it sounds like earlier, that US FDA approval process is obviously different than approval in other countries.
Well, the goal of these companies, as I said, is to get acquired, right, by a larger company. Is the name of those buyers is strategics. So Boston Scientific, Medtronic, J&J, they're called strategics in the industry,
Got it.
strategic buyers or acquirers. So that's really their goal. How they go about it, that's another story, but that's their goal. So the way they usually go about it is they have to gather clinical data that validates the safety and efficacy of the medical innovation. And then they usually go overseas to gather that clinical data so that they can come back to the United States and present that data to their buyers, to their strategics, to their investors to raise more funds, and to the FDA to tell the FDA, listen, I already completed a clinical trial in Colombia, in Argentina, in Brazil, or in Australia. I recorded all the results here in this slide deck. They are great. All patients are happy. They have been treated. We did 20 patients. Here are the results. Let's talk about you, FDA, approving a larger pivotal or phase 3 clinical study in the United States that may or may not include foreign clinical sites inside that larger study. But the FDA wants that large study be done in the United States with a percentage that you negotiate with the FDA that can come from overseas. So usually the conversation goes about, all right, so let's do 300 patients. 70% of the patients will come from the United States. I will give you permission to include up to 30% of the patients from overseas, from Latin America, from Eastern Europe, from whatever. So that's usually how it works.
And so it's a strategy whereby
Yes,
the
exactly.
acquiring company would then take that data, take the intellectual property essentially that they've purchased, and
Yes.
have the resources because it's a larger company to then move it through the FDA clinical trial process for approval in the US.
Exactly. Yes, because the US is the largest market in the world. The European market is also very large. The Japanese market or the Chinese market is very large. So those are usually the markets they want eventually. But that's beyond the initial goal of having a larger pivotal study, because by the time they get a pivotal study approved by the FDA, then the strategic will buy them
Right.
and they will take care of the rest of the
Because
commercialization.
as a startup and you're burning through your capital and you're trying to hit
Yes,
these milestones without the funding or the data to get US approval, you've identified a way, essentially a strategy for startup companies to reach their goal, which is obviously
yes,
a product that can be purchased and an exit, a liquidity event that then allows an
exactly,
easier track for that drug, which maybe would never have gotten even to that stage in the US because it's so expensive
exactly.
to then
And
finally have the
bureaucratic.
opportunity, yeah, to finally have the opportunity to come to market. Are there any examples that you have that you can share of it's with certain conditions that this model is helping patients with?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, we have worked with companies that have obtained either CE mark approval because it's usually faster, and are right now in the process of obtaining FDA approval. One company to mention is Regeltech. It's a company of Baltimore. They developed these innovative technology. It's a polymer that you inject in the back to treat back pain, lower back pain. It's a 15-minute procedure with a syringe, with a polymer, and that intervention will alleviate or has been proven to alleviate back pain. So the point is that we did a 30-patient trial in Colombia, South America, and they are now in the process of setting up the larger pivotal study in the United States. But before that happened, they just obtained CE mark approval very recently, a couple of weeks ago.
What
So the
approval?
product CE mark, meaning the European Community, the
Oh, got
European
it.
Union approval, CE mark approval.
Yep.
Yes,
CE.
which
Yep.
is a huge milestone for this company. And of course, the value of the company has skyrocketed because of that event. And their investors are now happier and willing to invest more, and their strategics are now more open to having more serious conversations about acquiring retail tech.
and,
So yeah,
and
that's a
there's
perfect
a
example.
and there's a potential treatment for patients
Yes,
that would have not made it this far that is now being evaluated in the US for potential approval.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Any other
Yes.
examples that you can share?
Yes, there's another company called Innovane. Innovane is they used to be called Hancock Jaffe Labs out of California, and Innovane. I'm sorry, Invino, Invino, and Invino did I think it was a 20 patient study also in Colombia, and they validated the safety and efficacy of a venous valve to treat reflux or chronic venous insufficiency in the legs. And now they are actively recruiting patients for the pivotal study in the United States. It's already approved in the United States. It's a publicly traded company, and they are about to get FDA approval probably this year,
Amazing.
thanks to the data they got from Colombia.
Yeah, amazing. Are there any? So it sounds like clinical trials. You mentioned Colombia, different areas in Latin America. What are some of the countries that have the infrastructure? Obviously, everybody's got population and patients that could potentially volunteer, but not all countries have necessarily the infrastructure to be able to run
Mhm,
these clinical trials. So, what are some of the more attractive
mhm.
foreign countries or other countries besides the U.S. Where clinical trials are being done for U.S. companies?
Yes, I'm gonna give you a very recent example. There's a company called ASOFT, AXOFT, ASOFT, out of Harvard, out of Boston. They are a spin-off of Harvard Labs, which is the medical incubator of Harvard and Harvard University. And the company was set up by PhD students or graduates of Harvard. And they came up with this fantastic innovation for neurology, similar to the Neuralink that Elon Musk is developing. So they are doing with us a breakthrough clinical trial in Panama. Panama is a country in Central America that offers great benefits for companies like ASOFT because the approval timeline in Panama is about 60 days, 60 to 90 days tops,
60
which is
days.
really,
Oh my
yes,
gosh. Wow.
versus 9 months, 12 months, 2 years in the United States.
Oh my
So
gosh.
imagine that. And the hospital where they're doing the study is a beautiful state-of-the-art facility, brand new, that has nothing to envy any facility in the United States. So we've done probably, if I remember correctly, 10 patients or something. This is all public information. It's all over the news. There's been press releases about it because of the nature of the innovation being done in Panama. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the hospital there and the state of the art hospital. I've heard great things about medical care in Panama.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
it's interesting. As you're talking, I'm thinking 20 years ago. I'm not so sure this could have happened
Yes.
because of the state of development, where technology, hospitals, infrastructure, communications infrastructure, laboratory infrastructure in a lot of countries around the world aren't as sophisticated and advanced to the point where they are now. So, would this
Yes.
even have been possible 20 years ago in many of these countries?
Mm. Yeah, you're right. Probably not. Yeah, the development that I've seen over my 20 years of experience in Latin America has been incremental growth in the hospital infrastructure of these countries like Panama. I also saw huge developments in Paraguay, in Chile, Colombia. So yeah, Latin American countries are maturing at a fast pace and becoming global players in the international global innovation ecosystem.
Wow, that's amazing. That's fantastic. Where do you see
Yeah.
this? Where do you see this going? Do you see this to be a one-off, meaning that, what you're doing are, for smaller players in the market who are just trying to innovate and get a new product to market? Or do you think that this is going to be a trend of companies wanting to exit the US for early stage drug development?
I think it's a trend, John. I've been in this business or in this industry for 20 years, and I've seen efforts being done in the United States to expedite the approval of early feasibility studies. That's how they actually have a program at the FDA called the EFS program, Early Feasibility Study Program, to speed up the approval. But it's just difficult to do it. I mean, they haven't been able to do it in 20 years because of all the stakeholders that you have to coordinate and synchronize for these studies to be approved. You have to reinvent the whole healthcare system of the United States to get these trials approved in 60 days. It's just impossible. So I don't think it's going to happen, especially now with this new administration. So I think it's here to stay. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, about
and
40% of all clinical trials are done overseas.
40% now.
Yeah, 40%. Yeah.
And I imagine that's increasing.
Yes.
You said something that got my attention. I think there's a lot of people who would agree with you that the healthcare system in the United States needs to be reinvented. Our delivery of healthcare is incredibly inefficient. Per
Yeah.
capita, we spend more than any other developed country, and yet we have the worst returns on our investment in terms of
Yes.
morbidity and mortality statistics, and even infant
Hmm.
mortality. It's just broken on so many
Yeah.
levels, and a lot of that is the bureaucracy,
Yes.
and how healthcare is delivered because of it, and the financial incentives, and the financial incentive within the drug development world has spawned this innovation that you as an entrepreneur and your brother
Yes.
have identified is a real, asset, not only for investors, but finally getting potential treatments, life-saving treatments, life-altering treatments, to patients that they otherwise wouldn't be getting because of how bureaucratic and broken the system is in the US.
Yes. Exactly. You're right on point.
And you have a podcast. I want to make sure you mention that, let everybody know what that is, because I think people, if they're listening to this, they might be really interested in hearing some of your episodes as well.
Yes, it's called the Global Trial Accelerators. It used to be called Latin MedTech Leaders, but we rebranded, reinvented the podcast to give it a more global perspective because we realized that there are other countries where innovators, medical innovator startup companies can go to other than countries in Latin America. They are also looking for help navigating the regulatory waters of those countries like Eastern Europe, Australia. But for natural reasons, for organic reasons, or obvious reasons, Latin America is closely aligned with the United States. If you look at the time zone, if you look at the geographical position, time to fly to the different countries in Latin America, so it's just more convenient for U.S. companies to look at Latin America before they look elsewhere. But anyway, the point is that the Global Trial Accelerators podcast speaks with leaders of the biopharma and medtech industry who have experience in global trials for their startups, so that newer leaders, newer CEOs, a lot of these companies, by the way, a lot of these startups are started by new founders. I mean, new inexperienced CEOs, inexperienced PhD graduates that just got out of school and they just trying to set up a company to develop an innovation. So they don't know all that needs to be known about how to execute properly a clinical trial overseas. And when you cross the border, things are different. You have so many uncertainties. You have so many variables in the equation. So having these conversations with these experienced entrepreneurs and founders help the newer founders avoid mistakes so that innovations come to market faster.
How can people learn more about your work? What's your website? Where can they go if they're interested in this topic?
Yes, the company's website is bioaccessla.com for Latin America, bioaccessla.com. or just Google my name, Julio Martinez-Clark, and you're going to be able to find me all over. I write a lot of blogs. I write articles. I'm a columnist for a leading publication in the US. I am very, very active on LinkedIn, so you're going to be able to find me very easily. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing all this with me. I'm so excited to learn about your innovations and what you're doing. I think it's phenomenal. So thank you for spending some time with me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here, John.